Welcome back to Inclusive Design 2024, brought to you in partnership with our amazing sponsors and supporters. Our platinum supporters this year are Barrier Break and Intopia, and our gold supporters are InfoAxia and Tetralogical. You can follow us on Mastodon, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, and Twitter if you have questions for the presenters. Post them using the hashtag ID24 hashtag, or you can use the YouTube chat. We'll gather your questions for our Q&A at the end of the session, and Ted and I will actually be passing them on to Annie and getting that feedback from wonderful Annie. A reminder that hashtag ID24 is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website. I am delighted to be joined by my guest host, Ted Drake. Ted, over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to be the host for these next two sessions about inclusive design. I came into accessibility as an engineer, and I'm learning inclusive design every day. So this is really, really cool for me. Please join me in welcoming Annie Liu. She will be talking about practicing inclusive design in consultancy. It's going to be a case study. So with that, over to you, Annie.
All right, thank you so much, Ted, for the introduction. I'm super happy to be here today. Sorry I didn't manage the tech with the browser, but it's going to be fine. So you're going to see the content. So what I'm going to talk about today is really to share what I have accumulated in the last 2.5 years in IDEO practicing inclusive design. I will be talking about practicing inclusive design in the context of consultancy. However, especially when you're not designated to that task. I will share some project example on how we have done it. And though my learnings come from consultancy context, I'm certain that the tips I will be sharing will be also applicable to anyone who works with external or internal stakeholders. So I won't be seeing your comments directly in real time YouTube. I will definitely have a read after. And as Ted and Stuart mentioned, we also have the Q&A in the end, so to share your question and thoughts with you, with us as you listen. So I'm going to do a little bit of official about me. So my title is the Design Research Lead at IDEO London. I'm from Taiwan. I'm usually based in London, but I'm actually presenting from Taiwan today. So don't worry, I'm not presenting at 3 a.m. in London time. My academic background is in anthropology and business. I'm very passionate about combining ethnography and cultural study with strategy in my research approach, and also when I do project and design. Before I joined IDEO, I worked as a UX researcher for 5 years in different tech companies in Berlin. And I've always been really into researching and designing for underrepresented groups. I did research in Tanzania when I was working at Eda Health, my previous company, a healthcare startup, to explore how to cater to the needs of the market. Also volunteer teaching UX research and also introduction to computer to refugee women from Syria and other countries that are affected when I live in Berlin with Ready School. And now I have been trying to practice more inclusive design on the job since I joined IDEO 2.5 years ago. And since my craft is in research, I will be sharing with you is a little bit more leaning into the research part of the design process. And because of this, I would also love to hear kind of from other disciplines, ideas, how to practice inclusive design on the job. So now I also want to do a more personal about me and share what motivated me to do this talk today. So some months ago, I learned that we are welcoming a daughter. And yes, I'm very pregnant in this moment, and she's due to arrive in a month. So if I do drop abruptly in any time, you know what might be happening. And forgive me for that. And when I learned that we were having a daughter, I was very happy for many reasons. One of it was that I feel I was given an opportunity to help my daughter, a woman, kind of fight all the things that she might encounter being born into this biological sex from the very beginning, and help her understand from very early on that she does not have to accept the labels that the society will be giving her. And sometimes you'll feel excluded, but it's not her problem. So some of you might know that you're encouraged to speak to your baby where they're in your belly, because they develop the ability to hear voices from the outside around 6 or 7 months. And I found myself saying to her, I'm going to try to make this world better for you, though not just for you, but for all those that might feel excluded at some point because of their identity. So while I've been really passionate about designing for the underrepresented and making our society more inclusive, has proven to be quite difficult to get a job that actually focus solely on that with that title, and even the projects that's purely inclusive design. So and all of the projects and experience I have shared before was not the main task of my job description. So what I have been doing is kind of like being a little undercover and trying to apply inclusive design wherever and whatever project I'm working on. And that's what I want to share with you mainly today, how you can do that, especially in this consultancy context. So I believe that inclusive design is not something you are, like your job title, even though if it is, congratulations, that's amazing. I love that. I'm really jealous. But it's something that you can really do, no matter what your job title is. So before I dive in, I'm going to talk a little bit about IDEO to just help you grasp the context I'm working in. So for those who might not be familiar with IDEO, we're a global design consultancy. The most popular keyword people think about when they think about IDEO is probably design thinking. But what we do in each office is a bit different. So at the London office, we do quite a bit of strategy design project, which is quite a broad term, but we design a bit of everything from products, brands, experiences to services. They're mostly informed by and are informing the business strategy as well in the same time. So we often work on very early stage discovery project when it's still very ambiguous what we're designing for, what we're designing and who we're designing for. And we work with very senior stakeholders who are very influential in our decision makers, ranging from C-levels to global heads of different departments. And these two criteria combined really put us in a great position to help a company be fundamentally inclusive early on in the design process, which is what we really hope to see with inclusive design. However, it's really important to note that the direct asks from our clients are usually not to be more inclusive. When we dig deeper into the brief that they give us, we can often identify opportunities to apply inclusive design. So I'm going to share some examples of 3 projects from different industries where I have identified signals to include inclusion as part of the project. Then I'm going to dive deeper into the 3rd example to give you more concrete examples how my team and I have practiced being more inclusive throughout. So the first example I want to share with you is with a beauty company. So the client came to us and asked us to help design a sub-brand that would attract Gen Z. So I'm sure many of you have experienced a similar ask. It's top of mind of many companies across all industries to be able to attract Gen Z, the next generation of consumers. However, as we start to learn more about the company and their business, we quickly realized that their leadership team sits in Europe mainly, while their core markets are actually emerging economies, and the main customers are from lower socioeconomic classes. And this is where we see the opportunity, or maybe even just the importance to be more inclusive in our approach. So in my mind, we reframed the challenge to how might we, that is about recognizing the bias our clients and ourselves as a team sitting in London as well might have, and to develop a sub-brand that truly caters to the needs of Gen Z from lower socioeconomic class in emerging economies. And the second example I want to talk about is when we work with a pharmaceutical company. So the company come to us to introduce a new immunization, a new vaccine to healthcare professionals as well as to caregivers for their newborn babies. So when we are diving into, or when we're designing the research, we recognize that caregivers, so this like parents or anybody who's caring for the baby, with lower health literacy, they usually rely more on the healthcare professionals' recommendations on how to immune their child versus people with higher health literacy, they might be doing a lot of research on their own and self-informed. However, we also learned that the healthcare professional, usually due to the lack of medical resources in healthcare industry across many countries, they don't really have a lot of time to learn about new immunization, also don't have a lot of time to talk to the caregivers and provide those information. So we see there's the gap of need, and the opportunity to be more inclusive is to really think about how might we enable healthcare professionals to learn about the new immunization in a really quick way, and then help them communicate to the caregivers in a simple and easy to understand manner. So tackling that for both, so in the end, that the people that we want to recruit with lower health literacy will also be able to know about this kind of immunization and vaccine to protect their babies. And the last example I want to talk about is in the hospitality industry. So our client at this time was a pub chain from the UK. They came to us with the ask to help evolve their pubs so they're future-proof and can attract new customers while maintaining existing ones. During our conversations with our client, we learned that while pubs in the UK are public houses, so historically, pubs are actually like extended living rooms of people in the UK. People used to have very small living spaces, and the pubs serve as a function where everyone hands out together. However, the reality is that not everyone might feel welcome in the pubs today. Groups such as women, ethnic minorities in Britain, or even some members of the LGBTQ+ group, and also people who just don't drink alcohol, can find pubs alienating to them because of the crowd that are currently occupying the pubs and how the pubs are designed. So the evolved challenge that we have in mind then for this was to really think about how might we evolve the pubs from a chain so that they feel welcoming, attractive to a more diverse group of audience, while still maintaining the existing customers, because that's also very important to our clients. So now I kind of fly you through 3 examples of how we identify opportunities to be more inclusive project. You might be itching to know how exactly then do we include inclusion in the process. So I'm going to dive deeper into the pubs to show you how we included inclusive design practice on this project, even though it was not the initial ask of the client. So this won't be new for people in the design industry, but before I jump in, I just want to briefly recap our design process for those who are not familiar with it, so you have the context in mind. So this is very similar to the double diamond. On our project, we usually start with exploring the topic area and getting inspired. So this means that we start by understanding the client context, and this could be through a method like stakeholder interviews, workshops, the clients, reading up relevant documents that they have, and also get inspired with external sources like desk research, expert interviews, or primary research where we interview people or go out there and immerse ourselves in different environments depending on the need of the project. And then we'll synthesize all of that and then come up with opportunity area for design. And then the next phase is ideation. So we ideate design solutions based on the different opportunity areas that we have identified and with the client. And then we'll test them with people that we hope our design will serve to get their feedback and then iterate. And then the last phase is execution. So this is creating the design and testing with live prototypes really out in the market, which you might know as alpha or beta testing. So I have identified a few 4 key steps to help you start practicing inclusive design in this process I've talked about. I'm going to give you an overview here, and then we're going to look and talk more about each step. So first of all, starting by understanding how being inclusive can really support the client's business objective. And then second, review the design process to identify key inclusive design activities. And third, design research so that not only the outcome is inclusive, but also the research process and experience also feels inclusive. And then lastly, deliver the practical inclusive solutions that help clients achieve their goals and not just sounds like something that's good to have. So number one, understand how to support the client's objective. So as I have touched upon before, as part of the process, we interview key clients and stakeholders to really understand upfront the context our project is in. Through those conversations, we seek to learn what's their objectives, what do they want to achieve with the project working with us together, what's the rationale behind and the real talk behind the written project brief they gave us, what obstacles might they have encountered that stop them from reaching their goals. And it's quite easy at this moment to pop in some inclusive aspects in those conversations to really understand what they have done already to be more inclusive with their solutions and what might have been stopping them. So on this specific POP project, we spoke with our core clients from our core client was from the brand team, so in the middle, who is tasked to really bring the brand to life through design, through experiences in the pubs. And when they were talking to us, they kind of lightly talk about, oh, there's some D&I research that the insights team have been doing. However, there was not like the initial document they recommend us to read or gave to us. And then we saw that kind of as an opportunity. So we asked to actually talk to the people from the insights team, the researcher that was responsible for that, and that actually opened up a new world for us. We learned that they have done a lot of research already to understand what make pub more inclusive for ethnic minority in Britain, as well as LGBTQ plus group and people with different abilities. However, when we ask what has been done with the learnings, most of them state research findings instead of design solutions. And the main reason is because research is done by the insights team, who doesn't really have the design function. And while the company is really insights centric, the team doesn't have the power to implement. And the brand team, while they resonate with those insights, they also kind of lack practical solutions to bring them to life. So we see that there is a gap in that. And we happen to sit in this this great gap, which I guess the client identified in their own ecosystem. And that's why they brought us in with design. That what was missing in the organization was a design that translates those learnings into solutions so that the brand team working with the CMO and the managing director together on strategy can bring that to life through these practical solutions. So recognizing that our project sits in the sweet spot and having that sponsorship from the key decision makers, this gave us a really great starting point to kind of suggest things that could have a strategic influence. So now we have kind of understood the North Star and the context of our client. We went back to review the design process for opportunities to make the pub more inclusive and welcoming to these diverse groups. However, at the same time, we're really mindful that this is not an inclusive design project. It's not what we're paid for to do, but what we are reflecting on is what activities or low-hanging fruit can we do to make our design more inclusive with this existing process while achieving and delivering the original ask. So after reviewing the design process, these are some of the inclusive activities that we have done. So before the project start, we did this team reflection. In IDEO, we usually work in multidisciplinary teams. Each person brings in a different expertise. So my expertise is design research, but often we also have interaction design, experience design, business design, people with different craft. We recognize that each person brings into the project is not just a professional craft, but also their lived experience based on where they're from, things they have done, in both their personal and professional life, and many of these things that the other teammates might not be aware of. However, all of this can, in a way, enrich and also bias our design. So what this team reflection does is that it brings us as a team together to reflect what perspective each individual is bringing onto the project. And then also recognize what perspective might we be missing as a team. What assumptions that we are having might be rooted in the bias that we have. So for example, on this project, we have some British colleagues, and being white British growing up with the pubs, one might have a really strong idea of what the pub is and what it is not. But how much of that can be generalized was one thing that kind of the team reflected on in these conversations. And these reflections are what kind of inform our approach and make us aware what voices we might need to include in the process that we don't have as a team as well. Then, oops. Okay, so and then during the inspiration phase, what we did, the activity we did is to review the past research. So knowing that the insights team have done so much great work on D&I, we really lean into that, what they already know. And also to kind of lean into the power of AI and speed up the process, we also create a ChatGPT bot that consume all the past research that they have done in the inclusive area that allow us to kind of quickly sense check and have like quick chats with the ChatGPT bot to refer back to the original learnings as we design. And then during the expert interview phase in the inspiration, we also intentionally invited expert that can that is an architect, and she has done many projects, design more inclusive public spaces that help us quickly learn about the principles of what makes spaces more inclusive and what can make it also alienating, and that serve as a foundation for our design principles as we design forward. Finally, during the ideation and feedback phase, when we were putting together and thinking about the interview profiles, we were very intentional about who we should include in our research. So other than existing customers, the new customers we want to attract is where we could in kind of who we wanted to include, basically. So these are the people that we're going to show our design ideas and get feedback from, and their voice really determine what our design is, who our design is catering to. So we had to, of course, and as always, prioritize a little bit with the client together, which groups are more important. And in this case, we aim for women, asking minorities in Britain, and LGBTQ plus groups. So these are the activities that we have done in the design process. All of them, I would say, are in a way low hanging fruit, as they are already natural part of what we design, how we design. Like the team reflection was an hour of everybody's time. And then the past research we're reading through, it was like a few more documents that we have to read through. And then the expert interview is kind of part of our standards. It's just like bringing one more perspective, and the ideation feedback. It was just kind of reviewing our interview profiles. And as mentioned, some prioritization was still needed. However, it allowed us to ensure that the voices are presented in the process. So now it brings me to step 3, number 3 is talking about design research in a more inclusive way. So it's really not enough to just recruit the right profile to participate in research. Every step in the research should be making the participant feel more included and comfortable. It's not just about being consistently ethical and respectful when you practice inclusive design, but it's also what will really get you actual good insights from research when your participants feel comfortable, and that can really speak their mind. So for this project, that was not our main target group. We initially also wanted to include wheelchair users, However, we quickly realized how inaccessible pubs currently are already throughout the process of just setting up the research. We wanted to have a group workshop that's in situation. So our research setup was that we're going to invite everyone to the pubs. We're going to have some prototype in different spots. We'll walk around, show them, and get feedback from everyone. And then we're going to come back together and discuss as a group. However, this is incredibly unsuitable for a wheelchair user because first of all, the functional room or the meeting rooms that we're using are usually upstairs on the second floor. And while the pubs mark themselves as accessible, it's only accessible on the first floor. They don't have any elevators that allow wheelchair users to go upstairs. And also just thinking about walking around, going around the pubs with all the guests around during their business time, it's not really feasible for a participant on a wheelchair. So we learned kind of the hard way. We didn't really include the wheelchairs users in the end, I have to admit, on this project. But we know that including the wheelchair users in the in-person research with such a setup means that you really need to have upfront accessible space for them, and also the research design need to work. And sometimes this very kind of idealistic, fun in situation work where you have to walk around a lot might not be the best setup in this case. And another group we invited was ethnic minority in Britain, and also women also, yeah, a big group. So we always intentionally distribute a group so that someone else also share their identity in a group. So instead of walking into a group that just with maybe white men, we intentionally mix the groups so that they can feel more comfortable and have comrades during the group conversations instead of feeling more isolated and excluded, having to be the one that kind of brings in a different perspective and kind of be that voice that's single out in the room again. So including person from underrepresented group in a group session also means that making them feel comfortable, that they could see that there are some people that share their identity, so that they don't feel alone during the group conversations. And finally, it's also really important to ensure that people with different personality trait can equally voice their opinions during a research session. And it's especially important in a group conversation that it can be dominated by extroverts, but quick thinkers who just quickly throw out their ideas, or native speakers. By intentionally design the interaction of the group session with simple tricks, like, for example, giving everyone some time to write down their thoughts down first, and then taking turns to share, can already ensure that each person's voice is heard. So including participants from different personality with different personality traits is really trying to intentionally design a research interaction so that we make sure everyone's voice can be heard in the process. Finally, one last thing that we did that could be interesting for everyone is we recognize that the topic we are addressing is quite sensitive. But in the same time, the client was also really pushing us to get a more general perspective. And that's why we kind of went for the group session where there's a mixed point of view and not kind of like single out a certain group with their identity traits. So the balance that we found with the research setup is to first have this in-person group sessions. That's like 3 hours. So that's this in situation when I was describing kind of workshop with really diverse mixed group. And then we couple it with selected participants to have follow-up interviews. That's actually remote and just 30 minutes. The idea is that we wanted to kind of allow them to dive deeper into the topic, to talk more about what made them feel excluded and included, giving feedback with that specific lens on our design. And I have to admit that this was an experiment when we did it. We were kind of like trying this out to see how it would work. And it worked very well because people were actually able to kind of bound in the first group session So the facilitator really bonded with each of their group, creating that connection. And then when we have the follow-up interview, we always make sure that the facilitator who they have bonded with already in the in-person session is also there, so they feel comfortable. And then having one more experienced interview facilitator that are quite aware of the sensitivity and how to handle those topics do the interview. So this created a great balance for allowing us to get insights on more general learning, but in the same time also gain insights on the sensitive topic. And we were actually delighted and surprised to learn that people actually talk about many different things during the follow-up interviews that really enriched our design. So lastly, the 4 steps. When delivering, it's really important to make sure that it resonates with the client's objective. So remembering the one that we learned from the beginning, because it was still a business ask, but we have a lot of intention to help them be more inclusive. And actually, a lot of clients really wanted to do that as well. But it's important to share really practical solutions that help them get there instead of just insights that sounds great and important, but hard to bring to life. So this specific client, we like our key sponsor and stakeholders, they're actually a woman themselves. But we also see clearly that they need to consider the entire business needs and be able to defend their decisions in front of their stakeholders, like the CEO. So what it was important to do is for us to help them achieve that and make our deliverable very easy to do that. So to be honest, after the feedback workshop, we were a little bit concerned how we deliver our learnings because we were concerned that the client might find it too focused on including the underrepresented. There seems to be there's a bit of like an overlap when we're talking about attracting new people, keeping the old people. And then in the same time, it's kind of like, it could feel like skew too much towards inclusion, which was not the reason that they hired us for. However, what we did was that we really tried to anchor back to the design solutions. So when we presented our solutions and our learnings, we made them relevant for both for both kind of the inclusive profiles or underrepresented profile and the existing customers. And here are some examples. So one that we learned was that large and transparent windows will really enable people to evaluate if the pub is for them from the outside. So they can kind of see already like who's inside the space and decide if they want to go in. And that was like one important criteria of what would kind of help them feel safe. They go inside a space. And then another one was having more visible non-alcoholic alternatives. That could be food, that could be non-alcohol or low alcohol drinks, to emphasize kind of alcohol is not the only reason to visit, but it can also be a place to just bond socially. And then the last one is to intentionally design different zones that can serve different crowds. And zoning was something that we learned last throughout the pub project that pub already do. So they have the outdoor space, they have this one space that people are watching sports, they have another space that people are playing pool, they have another space where it's more like cafe-like and cozy, that's the little nooks. And having all these different places allow different crowds to kind of find their areas in the pub and also feel comfortable with the people around them. So these are 3 very kind of high level. I cannot share, sorry, more about the content, but these are kind of more high level directions that we have learned throughout design that can cater to not only being more inclusive of different groups, but also just in general for whoever is visiting the pubs. So I think the impact that we were able to have is that by the end, we realized inclusive design became part of the design process and not just a separate task. So some of the things that I shared before become more like a principle that everybody identify after we went through this process, because we have been kind of hearing about them throughout design. Not to say that they're always prioritized as the most important thing, but they serve as a foundation and a shared understanding of what will help a pub become more inclusive. So quick recap, the key steps to include inclusive design. So number one, understand how to be inclusive, how being inclusive can really support the client's business objective, looking for sign of places where you can apply inclusive design while you are meeting the client's needs and really understand where they're coming from and what's stopping them. The second one is to review the design process to identify key inclusive design activities that are also low-hanging fruits that can be done as part of the design process, because every step counts, and the movement, it's a movement to really change mind, both within the team, I would say, as well as with the client, moving from research to design solutions. And then third is to design research so that not only the outcome is inclusive, but the process is also inclusive, because that's really, I think, just consistent way of practicing inclusive design, but also a way that will get you better outcomes. And then lastly, when deliver in practical inclusive solutions that help clients achieve their goals. I would say it's risky to make it too inclusive, only inclusive related, and very important to kind of refer back to the bigger picture of the client. And it's not like to be cynical about it, but just that it's just what the business world wanted. And while the client might have the intention to support it, they also need a tool, and we can give them that practical tool to be more inclusive. So that was my talk. I think I'm pretty good with time. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm just gonna end with coming back to the beginning. So now I'm back in Taiwan. I'm getting ready for birth, and I admit that I was slightly worried I won't be able to make it and give this talk, but I did. And I am really happy that I had this opportunity to join this talk. It's a great way to kick off my mat leave with this, summarize my learning the past 2.5 years, and then kind of pass forward these learnings, hoping that it could inspire you, even just a little, who's working in a consultancy or anywhere else, to practice inclusion, even when you don't have a title of the project to do so, but can still kind of squeeze in part of this inclusive design practices and make our world a little better. And that's it. Thank you.
Annie, thank you very much for that. It was a very enlightening presentation. I'm glad the little one decided to be patient for all of us so that you could provide us this presentation, which is fantastic. One thing I'll just comment on before I hand over to Ted is you've highlighted something I think we all realize is an important thing, which is everyone, no matter what their role is around design or development or any other task in the space that we all work in, sometimes we've just got to slip the inclusion, the accessibility stuff into just that day-to-day stuff, even when it's not being asked for. And you've given a really good couple examples there where that's what you've done, and you've just not even made it an option. It's just you just put it in as part of the process that happens. So no, that was fantastic. Ted, I'm going to throw over to you and let you see how we go with the question side of things. I know we've got one or two sitting there.
Sure. We have one question from Stephanie Edwards. Do you find that owners and patrons have different ideas about what is accessible? She says, my father had to enter a pub through the kitchen because he uses a walker, and that was the only step, free access. And I think you could also extend that, not just what is accessible, but what is inclusive.
Can you help me understand a bit more about the difference between owner and patron?
So perhaps they think their pub is accessible because you can enter through the back door.
Oh, okay.
And so they're not understanding why it's not accessible. And Further, they might not understand why you need to be inclusive.
Mm. And the question is, do I think that there's a difference between the perspectives of the people bring in and on what is
Yeah.
inclusive? Yeah,
And
well,
perhaps how you convince them otherwise.
mm, well, I would be honest and say that was not something that we encountered directly, as in they do know that their pubs are not inclusive. The general managers in those spaces, they were quite clear with us when we were like seeking the possibility to do our research there. I feel like maybe this is my bias that I'm bringing is as a design researcher, it's always targeted around the people that are coming in. I would say most of the like the owners that we kind of interviewed, they would agree as the same as it's quite customer centric. So thinking about what's the experience of the people that are coming in that they have. And a lot of times the general managers that we encountered in those spaces, they actually don't have the power to change their space because this belongs to pub chain. So they were making kind of workarounds, like they would go and like open the door for them. They would try their best to accommodate them in the first floor where they could still access or support them different ways. So maybe this is not answering the question because I guess I did not really see this as part of the problem that we encountered.
We also had a comment. Julia Cotton said, "Thank you and all the best with your new baby."
Thank you. Yeah, this is not the best time zone for my usual network. All my UK friends and colleagues are sleeping. So.
That's okay, Annie.
So
But there's a whole other community here that through Asia, and Australasia, and Australia, and New Zealand that are all really pleased to be able to watch this live.
I have a question for you. I was going back in through your work history. Your design experience ranges from curriculum development, healthcare access, hospitality spaces, urban mobility. What are some of the similarities that you bring from one project to another?
Wow, okay, that's a really big question. I mean, I think, and this is also coming a bit from my research background, is the method or kind of the method and the process I'm practicing is fundamentally the same. And the part where I'm talking about making the participants feel comfortable is something I think that's not kind of foreign to people who are doing research. It's just that it has a different extent when you're trying to include different kind of profiles. So I would say kind of making sure that our design process is not only serving the design, but it's also kind of, and I would say like giving a good experience for the people who kind of co-design with us or participate in our design or just give us and share their time and thoughts with us, also really enjoy the process was something I feel like was consistent throughout all of my practices as well.
Another question I have going back to Stuart is, and I had also kind of pointed it out in my own notes, is sometimes you just have to push it through without telling people you're doing this. We used to do that with the early days of accessibility and standards-based web development. We wouldn't tell them we were going to build a website that was accessible. We were just going to build a website that was accessible. But I was thinking back before you mentioned the answer to Stuart that if you did not do more inclusive testing for those pubs and you only listened to their current customers or people that were regularly walking up and down the block, you weren't really doing the customer justice because you weren't answering the question or getting the feedback from people that did not enter that pub, the people that were avoiding it. So I guess part of my question is, it goes back to this one story I heard where they put some researchers in the bottom of at the floor of a subway station and said, find out why people in wheelchairs are not coming on the subway. And after 2 days, they said, well, we didn't see anybody with wheelchairs, and that's because they weren't at the top of the steps watching people turn away because they couldn't get down there. So I guess long-winded way of saying, like, how do you get people to realize that being inclusive, doing this research where you're reaching out beyond what they think are their customers, is actually the best way and the only way to get the results they want?
I think we are kind of in a way lucky that we see in the space of innovation and like seeking new solution. So we kind of go with the line in convincing people and saying, this is what gonna bring kind of fresh perspective, even though they might not be your target customer, but kind of also applying the theory of inclusive design of how getting inspiration from a smaller group of people would inspire and benefit a larger group of people was something that we often talk about. And I think also kind of the pushing the edges because they're looking to us for like really new ideas. And then we will be, okay, we need some profiles that's more inspirational. I don't want to call them like, yeah, I mean, inspirational is still maybe not the best term, but because they should always be there. But that allow us to kind of communicate in a way to say, oh, this is not your main target customer, but it's gonna inspire and make your product and services or our design better for you.
If anybody has any questions, they can add. I think we have time for one last question. I did have a question going back to the previous conversation with Charlie Parker and Jacinta Gregory. Do you have any advice on preparing your research for people with disabilities? You mentioned the problem you had with wheelchairs, but did you kind of coordinate any additional research with people that use wheelchairs, or any other advice on setting those up?
Mm-hmm. So I will admit that I didn't in this project because of kind of the limited resource we have. And as I might have touched upon, it was not kind of a profile we prioritized. And I think that led to why we didn't design the research good enough for wheelchair user. Or I mean, there is like such a wide range of different abilities that we were looking into and really thinking like, which one should we include? But like people who have different neurodiversion is also like not the best in these crowded spaces. So there was a lot of like problem with including people with different disabilities in this research. And I think this made me realize, I mean, like one of our ideas to do just like remote interviews with them. I think that would in a way like at least include their voice into a certain extent. And that's a workaround, but I was really reluctant to do it because I truly want them to be able to be in situation, experience that, and kind of like, because just by setting up the research, we see what the problem really was. So I personally felt in this case, it would require like a separate session if that was something that we prioritize to really design it very differently and intentionally have that space and even like look for, let's say, a less busy time. So like, in the afternoon where there's like not crowded and noisy, to make sure that it's also comfortable for those with the abilities that we want to invite to the conversation.
Well, I want to thank Annie. I've got like another 25 questions for you, but we do need to wrap up so that we can prepare for our next presentation. I want to thank you again for all of your insights on inclusive design and working with your clients.
Thank you so much, Ted and Stuart.
Thank you, Annie. So for everyone else, if you like the session, hit that YouTube like button, and don't forget you can subscribe to youtube.com/inclusive design 24 to be kept in the loop on our future events. Inclusive Design 24 is brought to you with the thanks of our many supporters, including Barrier Break, Intopia, InfoAxia, Tetralogical, Intuit, Adrian Roselli, LLC, Assisted Labs, the Law Office of Laney Feingold, Skyscanner, and Vispero.